So I'd like to keep this color scheme here for population density, but I'm interested in mapping some other variables. So what I'm going to do is bring in the joined counties again here, and I'm going to shut population density off. I'm not going to remove it because I want to save this classification in these color schemes. So when I save my project file, I'll have this accessible whenever I need it. But my joined counties came in here again, and I'm going to open my attribute table just to see what I have. And I've joined all of the kind of racial and ethnic information, and I have also income. Let's go ahead and map the Hispanic and African American populations. They're kind of the two largest minority groups, and maybe maybe we'll add some others. But I'll click through and show you these two. So if we wanted to just create a simple ratio, we could go into our properties and then back to our categorized, or sorry, our graduated. And then if we wanted to, we could just throw down one variable and see what it looks like. For instance, let's do Hispanic here, and then tell it to do a color scheme. We'll want a linear color scheme. Let's do blue. And go to our classes and show some natural breaks. And I hope what you can notice is this isn't gonna be the best map, and eventually you can tell me why, but just check this out right now. What does it look like we're mapping, right? We are mapping kind of raw quantities. And so we do see some higher numbers of quantities in the southwest, which is near the Mexican border, and we might expect that. Same down here, kind of in the south eastern part of Florida, near the Caribbean. But we also see, obviously, a very high number in Chicago, and a very high number in kind of the eastern seaboard in the cities. And so the point I'm trying to get at here is that the phenomenon that I'd be more interested in seeing isn't necessarily kind of how many raw total people are there, because there's always going to be more people in urban areas. But I'd like to see a proportion of the total population, because my suspicion is that this area of the country has a much higher proportion of Hispanics in every county as a percentage of the population. So in order to do that, I'd want to go to my kind of my calculator here, my symbology calculator. And before we went into the table and kind of did it, I'll show you really quick. We went into our attribute table, right, and we calculated a brand new field. But if we're lazy and we don't want to go kind of calculate a whole new field, we can just go up here to our calculator, and it will do it in virtual memory so that we can kind of play around and not have to keep calculating new fields. So what I'll do now is I'm going to get rid of this and go to my fields and values and say, let's do Hispanic divided by total, and then I'm going to multiply that by 100, so it gives me a percentage. That's the ratio. So let's say OK, and then I could say classify again, but what I need to do is I need to hit classify. I can't just say OK yet. I want to hit classify so that I can see the new values. Natural breaks classified for percentage instead. So now I hit apply, and let's see what happens. Yeah, that kind of makes more sense, doesn't it? So I don't know if you can see, but the kind of pattern on the landscape has changed because we've normalized kind of as a percent of the population. And we still have much higher percentages of the population in urban areas, but even the rural areas in the southwest become much higher because they're being normalized for population. So I think that's pretty cool. Why don't you go ahead and try it on your own for African American and choose a color scheme for that, and then I'll show you how we can combine them so we can show both at the same time. Okay, I've created another layer that is percent African American, and this is also a Natural Breaks 5 class scheme. And you'll notice that if you use Natural Breaks, it's not going to create the same classes for each what we would say is a column or kind of field, because each of those fields has a different set of data. And so if you're doing a large set of maps, you might want to try to create the same classification scheme kind of manually between all of these. But for the purposes of our kind of quick lab. I'm gonna just call it good. But what I'd like to do now is show you both of these at the same time, and I think I want to just show the two greatest kind of classes here, because those are where the extremes of the data set kind of exist, and then maybe not show the last two and show a little tiny bit of the middle one and kind of highlight the top two. So I think what I'm going to do is actually just make some of the colors of the one on top a little transparent so that we can see below, so to speak. So to do that, I'm going to turn on this layer and go into its properties, and I'm going to manually adjust each of these colors, and I'll show you how to do that. With this one, I want this to be completely opaque, so I'm going to leave that the way it is. But then this kind of lighter green, I'm going to double click that and go to my simple fill. Oh, sorry. Yep, my simple fill and my fill color. And then I'm actually going to cut this back. I'm going to make it, let's say, 75% so that you see it kind of bleeds through a little bit. So I say okay, okay. And then this one I'm going to make very transparent. Let's make it even 30. So I'm doing 75 and 30, I think is what I have going on here. And then these two, these are kind of less significant percentages. So for our purposes, let's just make them completely transparent. Okay. I'm going to make that completely transparent and say okay. And now let's hit apply and see what happens. I don't know if you can see that, but now we see both at the same time. It might help our map to get rid of those county boundaries as well. So I'll do what I did before, select all and change the symbol. This symbol pertains to all the symbols when they're all selected. And I go to my simple fill and my border style, say no pen, okay. I'm going to say okay. Now problem is I need to do that down here too. So I go to properties here. And I'm going to change this as well. Oops. Yeah, I think you can either have them all selected or none selected and it will work. Let's see if that's true. Okay. Okay. Yeah, good. I did it. So that's pretty good. And because this is on bottom, I still, I don't need to go and change the transparency settings, but just for consistency, I think I will. I'm going to go ahead and make this 100% opaque, 75, 30, 0, 0. So I'll do that, and I'll see you in just a second. Okay, so as you can see, it kind of made the background a little more white because it completely got rid of these two classes for both. And I'm not going to do the white population because that's the majority group. I think I'm going to do two more. I'm going to do the kind of Native Americans, or sorry, I guess it's technically called American Indian in the U.S. Census, but I'll do the American Indian group, and I'll do the Asian group. And so I'm going to show you really quick. I'm not showing you every single step at this point because one of the best ways to get better at a program is to go and click around and do it yourself. And I'm hoping that you can develop some confidence. But instead of dragging in the join counties each time, I'm just going to show you that instead of doing this and then starting from scratch each time you want to symbolize a layer, instead of doing that, you can duplicate an existing layer. And we've done that once before, but in this case, if I duplicate this layer, it's going to at least have some of the symbology I want. So for instance, I hit duplicate, and then I always rename my layers so that I can keep track of them. So this is my duplicate layer on top, and I'm going to rename it percent American Indian, and so now I'm going to go and change the percentages for this and choose another color, and I'll see you in a moment. Okay, a couple of last words about this my American minorities map. Obviously, this is a categorical color scheme, and when you're dealing with mapping people, you just need to be conscious. Obviously, you don't want to overthink it too much, but you wouldn't want to use red for Native American, and you probably wouldn't want to use yellow for Asian or brown for African American, or they're just different things that you should be conscious of the color choices you're using. And the other thing is not even skin color, but the color red tends to be very kind of harsh, and so using the color red to represent people, or for instance poor or bad, it kind of makes you feel like something's bad. So the semantics of the colors you choose really do affect the person's interpretation of the map. Our perception of color is skewed, and so you should be careful about how you use color. Yeah, that's all. So I'm going to also say that I've just kind of created a default natural breaks classification independently for each of these. If you were doing some kind of population study, it would be best to probably create classifications that have some kind of statistical meaning. So, for instance, you could separate the class breaks into things that are above or below a standard deviation or the interquartile range or something like that, and you could kind of come up with specific statistical classes. For our purposes, though, this shows us the general trend, and I think it's good as a beginning. Now what I'm going to do is, it'd be nice if I could group these all together, and, well, I can. So I'm going to select all four and group them, group selected, and then I'm going to rename this group. I know I'm moving kind of fast. Rename, and I'm going to say racial demographics. And this is going to let me just kind of keep track here so that I can later, if I want, I can shut them all off or turn them all on at the same time. So now I've got kind of this cool set of maps where I've got the racial demographics, I've got the population density, and I hope you can kind of see that I'm moving towards having a bunch of maps that all kind of show the variation of the country. In the last video of this series, not this one, but the next one, we'll talk about how, Choropleth is good at showing these kind of ratios on the landscape, but you might notice that quantity is an issue here, just because these are the higher ratio areas. These tend to be very rural places, so the quantities of how many are found in each city are more difficult to say. So for our purposes now, we'll kind of go look at proportion of the population that voted for Romney versus Obama, but in terms of raw quantities, we'll do that not in this video, but the next video. Okay, so go ahead and shut off the layers we're not using, and I'm going to drag in Vote 2012, and Vote 2012 is, lucky for you, a pre-joined shapefile. So where I found that, I didn't have to download the table separately. Someone had already gone through the trouble to join the table to the shapefile. So open up the attribute table on Vote 2012, and you'll see a bunch of columns here. We've got the state, the county, the raw number that voted for Obama, the raw number for Romney or other, the total vote count. Then we also get percent Obama calculated, percent Romney, percent other, kind of the winner. And then we have the percent that the winner won by. So in this case, it would be winner was Romney, won by 72. Winner was Obama, won by 51. So I'm hoping you can kind of see how you might map this. And what I'd like you to try to do is map a divergent color scheme, blue through some either purple or gray to red, to show that places, let's say, over 75% Obama are dark blue and moving towards gray, and then in over 75% for Romney, for Romney would be darker red. So I'm not going to show you how to do that. I'm going to kind of fade into my version of the map, and then I'll explain what I did. And if hopefully you can kind of get to that, and that's the goal of this video, is for you to be able to do that on your own. Okay, good luck. Okay, so yours probably doesn't look exactly like mine, and that's because you made different choices. I'm gonna just let this kind of sit for a second, but I did two linear color schemes on top of each other to create a divergent color scheme, and I'm still not that happy with it yet because I am using opacity normally, and I want to show you really quickly a way to kind of blend these two layers together visually. So first I'm going to rename this percent Obama. I'm going to rename this percent Romney. And I don't know if you can see, but I did, whenever they lost, I just put it as gray. But of course, because Romney lost all of the ones that Obama won, the gray is bleeding through and kind of coloring all of those slightly a tone of gray that the Romney lower percentages aren't getting. So I could just shut this layer right off and that might help, but I want to show you one really quick thing that's kind of fun to do. So I'm going to go to Properties, and on the layer that's on top, you have these options down here which are layer blending mode, and some of them are pretty crazy. It's kind of like Photoshop effects. For instance, if you do difference, it looks really crazy because it's subtracting the colors, which you don't really want to do in this case. But burn, I think, does a pretty good job. So you do burn, and that helps both sets of colors kind of bleed through. And so I kind of like this as a final map, where the dark red are places that are very much, over 85% kind of supporting Romney, and then the very dark blue are places that are over 85% supporting Obama. And I don't know, I think this is kind of a nice compromise between them. And then you get the grays in between, the slightly kind of light blue gray being this class of 52. And anyway, so what I've done here, I'm going to group these, and I hope you can see now that we've got this is I'm just going to call it voting, and we have in our kind of thematic maps, we've got a divergent color scheme, which is really two linear color schemes that go in different directions. We've got an ordinal or categorical map that shows categories of different racial demographics and their intensity. And then we've got a linear color scheme that shows kind of just straight population density, and we can kind of compare them, which is fun. So one of the issues, of course, with this voting map is that it shows proportions, but that's not actually how our system works at all. It'd be nice to see, for instance, the quantities of voters in each section, because depending on how you classify these, you could pretty easily make it look one way or the other, like Obama or Romney was more dominant. So in the next videos, we'll look at ways of showing quantitative data that are raw counts instead of the quantitative ratio that we're showing now. All right, hope you've got through the video and that you've had fun.